All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I know there will likely be some more students coming in as we get closer to the end of classes, but I know we've got a tight deadline because there is a midterm in here tonight for our Physics 1 students, so send them kind vibes starting at 7. So my name is Ray Stout. I am one of the engineering career development advisors here. We put on programming like this to help get students information directly from the places they want to go. We do get a lot of questioning around interviewing, especially technical interviewing. And whenever we talk with employers, it seems that behavioral interviewing is often more important or as important as technical knowledge. So even if you have some thoughts around that at certain points, we can share that as well. So we have some set questions that I will ask, but we also want to turn it over to you. We'll let you have some time for you all to ask questions. So if you have some questions, do jot them down, keep them in mind. We will be sure to have some time for that. So first I want to introduce our panelists and who's here. And so we have Liam Carnes, who's Vice President of Global Engineering, North and Central America from Ball Corporation. And then from Ball Aerospace, we have Heidi, and I'm sorry, I'm not going all in the right order, who's Campus Relations and Strategy Lead. And then from Trimble, we have Kirk, and Kirk is actually a CU alum, a recent alum, and he's a software engineer at Trimble. And then we've got Randall Ball from Deloitte Consulting, also an alum, and he's a business and technology analyst. And then last but definitely not least, we've got Brian from the engineering department manager from SparkFun. So we want to thank them all for being here and sharing their expertise. We do have quite a we have a lot of great expertise on this panel, both from folks who have recently navigated the interviewing process to folks who have potentially quite a few years of hearing and seeing interviewees, which is always a fun perspective when you're on the other side of the chair. So we'll take turns, and what we'll do for the panel, I'll field questions to a few of you. If you ever want to chime in, feel free to chime in. That way we can move to students' questions a little bit faster. So don't feel like you have to share if you don't have a thought or strong opinion on that one. One last thing before we jump into the panel, I do want to give a shameless plug to our career fair, which is October 1st, 2nd, and actually also 3rd. The STEM industry career fairs are the 1st and the 2nd, and then all majors is on the 3rd, which will still include some STEM-related companies. So be sure to check that out on Handshake. It's 11 to 4 each day in the UMC. So all of that information is available on Handshake. Across the 3 days, we have 175 different employers coming. So great opportunity for students who are interested in getting and making connections for internships and full-time positions. So awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you all for being here. They will have microphones so we can all hear. So if you just make sure you turn the mic on before you get started. So for the first question, just to get a tone of kind of who's here, I think we kind of want to see, the first question is, do you interview candidates to be hired for your organization? And if so, what's the typical process for interviewing at your company? So Heidi and Liam, we thought maybe if you wanted to field those two, and anyone else that might do some interviewing as well. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to start with Liam right over here.
Right. So the process for us is based on seniority, what type of role we're pulling in. So if it's a senior leadership role, there's a lot, like psychometrics and things like that, where we'll utilize a lot of different people and different groups of interviewees or interviewers. If we're looking at a co-op, I would leave that to my departmental managers with HR working with them. Mm-hmm. So again, it all depends on the position that we're looking for, and obviously the level of position that we're bringing in for.
Awesome, thanks, Liam.
So I am at Ball Aerospace. Just to clarify, in case you're not aware, Ball Corporation and Ball Aerospace are part of the same company, but our HR functions and hiring processes are completely separate. One of the roles that I have is that I manage all of the campus recruiting, mainly for our intern program, although also for our full-time positions. For our intern program, our interview process is all phone interviews. So if you haven't familiarized yourself with how phone interviews happen, how the best practices for phone interviews, I strongly recommend it if you are thinking about intern. Mainly because, we'll interview based on obviously the candidates who are selected from the applicant pool, make a decision based on that, because then the internship itself is considered a 10-week interview for potential full-time employment after graduation. For full-time employment, it's generally a phone screen followed by usually an in-person where you'll meet with several different people throughout a department. So there's always an on-site as well for anything that's full-time. So is that helpful? Is that what you're going for?
Yeah. I think it's helpful to hear about the phone interview aspect, because a lot of times when we talk about interviewing, it can be like reading the energy of the room, and you don't actually have that over the phone. And that can be a challenge. Like some folks I feel anxiety about, how do I show up, or especially a technical interview over the phone, how do I talk about that? So if you have any tips for that.
I have lots, but do we want to, maybe we'll wait for other questions about that?
Absolutely. Stay exciting.
Okay.
Does anyone else have do any interviewing at their companies? Brian, do you?
I'll just reiterate what Heidi said. The phone screening process is pretty prevalent throughout most companies when they interview. Every place I've ever interviewed for positions has a phone screen initially, and I also do that when I hire even new college hires. It's very important to be prepared for those. Have intelligent questions. You usually only have about 30 minutes to tell as much as you can about yourself, so have a good story to explain who you are and what you do. Because that's where, if you do well there, then you get brought in for an in-person interview where there's even more prep that needs to happen.
Yeah. One kind of caveat to this question, do any of you employ video interviewing? And not necessarily like a Skype or Zoom interview, but a pre-recorded video interview. Do any of you employ that in your companies? Oh.
Hi, so I'm Randall from Deloitte, and during our interview process, one of the things that we do is we do a case interview. So it's similar to a technical interview, but a little different in that we give you a broad question, a broad problem, and see if you can solve it. And in one of our rounds, we actually give you that question as a video. So you'll watch a video about a company and a problem that they have, and then you'll have a certain amount of time to try to solve it. And then you'll come in and talk to the interviewer and go over your process and your approach to solving that problem.
Awesome. Thank you. And Heidi, did you have?
Well, I just want to say we are actively looking into it, and we are likely going to start using those at some point in the near future. It's not ideal, right? I mean, we all want to at least have the chance initially to have an actual conversation with people. With the volume of strong candidates and the volume of hiring that we're doing right now, just the fact that this technology exists and is a viable option, and it's not just us, it's not just a few companies. This is going to be, I think, in the future, a regular part of the process, like it or not. So we always want to maintain as much of a personal touch as possible, but sometimes with volume, you have to find a way to get through high volume candidates to get to the point where then you can spend that personal one-on-one time with people. So
thank you. Yeah, I always share with students at CU, if you want a position at CU, a full-time position, most departments use video hiring first, because we can video interview so many more people, and you could do it at home at your leisure, and I can watch it at my leisure. So it works for both folks, but you miss the personal touch a little bit. So awesome. Thank you. So we're kind of changing gears, and we'll popcorn this one because I think this is an interesting question. But what's the hardest question you've been asked in an interview, and how did you respond to it? And maybe for those of you that have more interviewed for your positions more recently, maybe were there interesting oddball questions that came up? Like, what is your favorite? If you were an office supply, what office supply would you be? Yeah, that one's a common one.
So the first oddball question that comes to mind while I was interviewing, I guess not too odd, but unexpected, was what are the last 2 books that you read? Clearly, it's not a technical interview question, right? But is this actually on? Okay, just making sure. Yeah, it's the guy who was interviewing me. Just really wanted to know: is this a person that's interested in learning, interested in keeping up to date, you know, is it fiction? Is it nonfiction? It doesn't matter it didn't matter to the guy that was hiring me. It just mattered that I was pursuing things that were interesting to me. So that's one unexpected interview question I could think of. I'm not sure I have another one off the top of my head.
Yeah, I've got one. So this still gives me nightmares. The first interview that I had actually like in my senior year, it was a behavioral interview, and halfway through the interview, he just said, all right, this is the part where I test you. And he asked me, how would you solve world hunger? And so I started going off about how geography plays a role in determining a country's GDP and how certain regions, blah, blah, blah. And thinking back, horrible answer. What he was really looking for was for me to ask, how do you determine success there? Right? I mean, if all he wants is to decrease world hunger a little bit, I could just go eat a hamburger. So the answer that I would have given depends on what he wanted success to be. And I think that applies to any question.
That's awesome. Any other unusual, or do any of you ask unusual questions that you can share?
So I'm sure you've all been told, or if you haven't yet, I'm going to tell you right now. When you are going to interview, try to find out who the person is that you're going to be interviewing with, who the interviewer is. Do a little research on them, perfectly acceptable to look up their LinkedIn, check out their background. You don't want to look up their credit history or anything, but just become familiar. I was doing one interview and it was pretty lengthy. It was an entire day. I was meeting with 12 different people, and I finally met with the leader of the whole entire, the dean of the department, was actually to work at a university a number of years ago. And he was tough, right? He was very serious. And finally he looks at me and goes, "What do you know about me?" I remembered where he had gone to school, and I just, I did not get that job. I hope that's not why, but as I walked out, I felt like that was why. So yeah, that one was, I thought I had prepared, but I hadn't enough. So.
Yeah. A little follow-up to that one with the oddball, but kind of on that same train of what do you know about me and knowing the company. In any of your roles, who gets to say in the hiring process or in the interview process? I've worked in teams where the admin assistant sits in on the interview and has an active role in the hiring process, all the way to the dean. So you kind of looking at that respect angle of how they treat different folks. So do you have different parts of team members sit in on interviews? Is it kind of unilateral? How does interviewing work at some of your different companies?
So my prior position, we had a full team, and anyone on the team, if they didn't like the person, had a very strong say. If they said, "I do not want to work with this person," we wouldn't hire them. Mm-hmm. But they were graded pretty much with every contact that they had, from the admin sitting at the front desk greeting the person, to the person who took them to lunch and see how they behave socially in a social interaction setting. So everyone had a say, but also the engineers. That's really the real tough questions come in, but everyone involved has a say, in my opinion. If someone doesn't like them, I'm not going to hire the person.
So for me, we tend to have a set of panel chosen. So if the role's, a specific role, who's going to be involved in the interview, it's quite formal in that way. And then the soft skill questions, we tend to set them aside depending on what the skill set of the interviewer is. So I tend to pick up the strategical questions. Somebody else might pick up some of the other types of soft skill questions. So, and then afterwards get together and talk it through. So, it's, even though the hire might be for my department, there'll be multiple people involved.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Liam, since you have the microphone and we're talking about some of those soft skill oriented questions, how do we answer the "tell me about yourself" question? What do you suggest? What are you looking for? Do you even ask it?
Yeah, I think we do in a lot of, maybe in a bit more candid way. I'm British. I don't tend to do emotions very well. So, yeah, we tend to ask the questions. It's more into trying to see whether, the person's able to be honest, and open up about themselves, but also make it connect with the role that they're going for. So, we're trying to make sure that the person's got a connection within the role that we're looking for as well. So, it's, you know, you've got to be quite cute when you come back with a bit of the responses. I'm trying to think of anything else to add to that. Remember, I don't.
What else? Anyone else want to chime in on the elusive tell me about yourself question that almost always gets asked?
Yeah, I can chime in a bit. So when we ask the question, we're looking for a person who's going to fit in at our company. So you're looking for that personality fit. And then also we're looking for someone with, you know, communication skills, presentation skills. How do you present yourself? And so that's sort of what we're going for when we ask that question, how you can explain what you do and who you are in a coherent way.
Here's what I don't want. Tell me about yourself. I don't want to hear your resume. I have it. I've read it. I don't want to see, well, I went to high school and then I decided I wanted to study engineering. And so then since I've been in school and I did this internship and I did that, that is not what I want to hear when I ask, tell me about yourself. And it's amazing. I would say still 3/4 of the people that you meet, that's how they answer the question, even if they're told not to answer it that way. Right. And so really what I'm looking for is, what's your passion? What drives you? Why are you studying what you're studying? And why do you, what motivates you to go to the next step? So kind of like what you were saying before, Randall, about, you know, are you going to fit in? What's, you know, what else can we learn about you beyond what's on your resume?
Awesome. Anyone else want to chime in, or does that sum it up? Yeah. I always tell students I work with, if you've ever met with me, you've heard this so many times, I always say it's like akin to dating, right? You're not going to ask the credit score on the first date, but like, can you get to know them? Can you ask questions? Can you share what seems useful? And then also, you probably shouldn't be dating because that would be an HR issue. And then sometimes they laugh and sometimes they look at me really shocked, like, I can't believe we're talking about this right now. So about the same response as just now. So moving on into, like, we've talked about kind of the stereotypical questions we get asked, the weird questions. What is your go-to interview question, and what do you consider a good answer to that go-to question? It could be technical or behavioral.
So my favorite go-to question is, what gets you excited to get out of bed every day? Really what I'm looking for there is what motivates you. Why do you want to get out and look at the sun in the morning? Or why do you want to go to work? Why do you want to not go to work? You know, finding out what motivates you helps me understand how I'm going to need to motivate you if I hire you. Some of the best answers I've had have really been, especially from an engineering side, is I'm really excited to learn. And so I'm excited to see what I'm going to learn today. What's new? What new problem I'm going to face? What challenge do I have to try to solve? Those are the types of answers I usually look for, but I've also had some off-ball ones where someone's like, I'm excited to go race a car. And so I do engineering so I can pay to go race a car. And that's cool too. That's a good answer. Yes.
I'll tend to ask a question about what, you know, I'm looking for people who are going to give me a response about style flex or feedback, how they listen to people and modify their behavior. So I tend to ask them, you know, especially for like leadership roles, you know, during your career, or what feedback have you had about the way you act and the way you lead, and how have you changed that? And that for me is quite important, because I want to see people who've got the ability to listen to the people around them and change, because, you know, not one style fits all.
So my experience with questions like this that are about you as a person, right? Why do you get up in the morning, or what motivates you? I found that, much like you guys have been saying, the answers that people responded best to are ones that were really authentic, whether or not they had to do with the role, right? And so when I was interviewing as a software engineer, I talked about how much I enjoyed music. Like I started a music degree here, and I really am passionate about music. I talked about that, totally unrelated though to, you know, what I was being interviewed for. But I think what really went over well is that I was very authentic and honest about what I was passionate about. And that seems to be what you guys are mentioning that you noticed as well. So
that's awesome. with that, are there any responses that maybe aren't the right authentic response? Like, is there anything that someone could say that, because I think sometimes students are, when they're talking about sharing some personal stuff, it's like, well, is there anything that's too much to share? So is there anything when you're being authentic? Obviously, maybe not some more inappropriate type title style of things, but within the realm of reason, is there anything that you're like, I don't know that I really want to hear about how you love to sleep? I don't know. I do like to sleep, but probably wouldn't talk about it in an interview.
I don't necessarily have a topic, but sometimes they come off a little too rehearsed. And it seems like I've decided this is what an interviewer wants to hear, so I'm going to memorize my answer to that question. And it's obvious when your answer to what are you passionate about, what gets you up in the morning, what drives you to pursue this field, all of those. We want to really feel your answer, not just hear it. Does that make sense? So that's kind of how I'm coming across. Because if it's too rehearsed, it's sort of like you just practiced that, memorized it.
Yeah.
So I'll build off that too as well. I think that's interesting that you mentioned that, because one thing that I noticed myself doing a lot during the interview process, when I faced an unexpected question, was I would just say, I need to think about that for a second. Pause, collect my thoughts about it before giving an answer, rather than spewing out the first thing that came to my mind. That didn't seem to throw anyone off. You don't have to have an answer ready to go. I think people want to hear, what actually comes to your mind, what you think of, and what matters to you. Does that add up? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think on the, to your point on the rehearse side, especially in a telephone interview, what really frustrates me is I get somebody who clearly are reading from a set of bullet points. So you've asked the question, and it's like, right, I need to put in lean manufacturing, I need to put Six Sigma, and you can see it's not natural. It doesn't come across natural. And that's, especially in a telephone interview where you've got like that half hour or the hour, and it's whether that person even makes it in front of somebody. By just coming off a script, it's not natural. It's not it really does put you straight off.
Randall, did you have anything to add to that?
No.
Okay, just help pass the mic. So we kind of have started about the behavioral. Now moving over to the technical. I know this is a space where students can have anxiety around that. I met with a few even this week. When you ask a technical question, what is the best response you have seen?
The right answer. No, realistically, we know that you're not going to have the answer for everything. And so when you do get a technical question that you don't know the answer to, I want to know how you'd go about figuring out how to solve it. I don't want to hear like, oh, I don't know. If you just say, I don't know, and that's it, then it makes the interview really boring and most likely not going to get hired. When someone says, I don't know, but I would go check Google, or I would go grab my old textbook. I remember reading about this. I know where to go look something up. And then from there, I'd be able to figure out what I would need to do. And in that case, I would often then give a good hint of what that would be, and then see if they can take it from there. In a lot of cases, those that can take it after giving that little bit of a hint do quite well the rest of the interview. It helps build some confidence. So don't be afraid to say, I don't know, but also then say, here's what I do to try to figure it out.
Yeah, I totally agree. And even if you have the right answer, don't just spit out a number, right? Like walk through your process, state your assumptions, go through the logic so that we understand how you're thinking about the problem, and not just that you answered, like that you memorized a solution to one question.
You kind of address this, Brian, but if they don't know the right answer, what's the best answer you've seen in response to that? I mean, you kind of said the what you like to see, but have you ever heard any like again, oddball responses or authentic responses that really are like, that's funny, I get that? Or
I've had someone still get it wrong, but to Randall's point, they walked me through their thought process, and while there was a flaw there, it was still a good answer because it expressed how they would go about solving it. They just made a wrong assumption when doing that. And so that's, to me, is still acceptable, and it's not necessarily a bad mark unless you do it all the time.
Awesome. So we only have about 2 more questions from our end. So if you have some questions you've been thinking about, start getting those ready, and we'll pass around the mic when that time comes. So I just want to give that nod to you all to start preparing. Many students are aware of technical interviewing and are not as familiar with behavioral-based interviewing. What advice do you have for candidates to prepare for behavioral-based interviewing?
So I sort of just went through this. I'm pretty fresh out of college. What I did to prepare was I prepared a bunch of stories in advance. So most behavioral interview questions are on like the same topics. It's demonstrating leadership, communication, teamwork, conflict resolution, etc. And so before the interview, I thought back and came up with some good stories that I could apply to any of those and sort of spin them in a way so that I could demonstrate how I showed leadership or really worked well as a team. And then I just practiced over and over telling those stories and telling them in different ways so that I could talk about how I was a leader or something else. And so I just practiced over and over so that when I went into the interview, when they ask, tell me about a time you demonstrated leadership, I don't have to sit there and think, oh, God, okay, I worked on a class project one time, yada, yada, yada. I'm just, in my head, I'm just sort of spinning it towards leadership, and then I go and I have the story ready.
All right, so those are all engineering students, pretty much, right? For the most part. Okay, so I'm going to give you a framework. I'm going to give you actually like doing exactly what Randall did. But here's, if you want to sort of figure out how to do it. Do you all know STAR acronym for this? Some of you probably do. Some of you might not. Okay, situation, task, action, result, right? So first step, I want you to Google behavioral interview competencies. Okay, you're going to come up with this list of things like teamwork, things like leadership, like taking ownership of projects, communication skills. These are all the things that that companies often want to measure in behavioral interviewing. Put them down one side of your Excel spreadsheet. On the top, put STAR, situation, task, action, result, and try to think up, here's my hint, 10 different stories from your life, actual things that you have done. It's difficult. If you sit down and you actually try to do this, you're going to be like, oh yeah, no problem. Then you're like, I have 3. But you don't know that these are the questions you're going to get. Again, this is where if you get a question that you're like, I don't have anything that fits into this, it's completely fine to have that pause. Can I have a moment to think about it? And then you'll come up with maybe something totally new. But if you have some of this prepared already, you have those stories and you've like written it down, and it's a great way to prepare for a behavioral interview because you can review them all. Again, you don't want to memorize them, but at least you can try to hit all those points and have some stories ready to go. And be specific. So just the behavioral interview is not designed to say, tell me about a time when you were working as part of a team and someone wasn't pulling their weight. What did you do? Has anyone had that one before? Yeah, right. That's one of the most common ones. I don't want to know, like, well, I don't know if I've been in this situation, but what I would do. No, I don't want to know what you would do. I don't know what you did do. So specific examples about something you actually did.
Just I want to add to that, it can be from anything in your life. It doesn't have to be directly related to the position you're interviewing for. So it doesn't have to necessarily be from a technical problem or a group project you were on. It could be from anything. It could be from a prior job if you had a job before, or if you have a job while you're in school. It can be from anything, a family situation that you're comfortable sharing. And I'll also add, when following the STAR format, it's really easy to get a very long answer. Try to keep it short. Try to have a couple sentences per each one of those acronyms. And I'm also been trained in STAR, so that is very popular to use for behavioral formats.
And just to hit on that one more time, Heidi mentioned come up with 10 stories. That's important because I've had interviews where I tell them a story and they say, great, tell me about another time. And so have backup stories and backup stories for those.
Do you have something to add?
Yeah, so I do think it is kind of tough, though, because you, have to prepare 10 stories, but then make them not seem scripted. Notice that one. No, the other thing I wanted to mention is I'll be honest, I never came to a Career Center panel before doing my interviews. I never prepared for the interviewing. And so I never knew to expect that there was going to be a behavioral interviewing process. I never knew to expect that I was going to have to talk about my personal life at the interviews. I just kind of expected, well, I've got my resume and I know things about physics, so I should be good, right? And then every interview that I went to asked me to tell me something personal, like when did you have to deal with conflict? When were you in a leadership position? When did you have a group project that you had to coordinate? And, you know, I had the deer in the headlights look of like, oh, haven't thought about that one before. So I do think it's very important to think about these. I wish I had known that before I started interviewing. So you guys have a leg up by being here, I will say that.
I once heard from an engineering manager, I think it was an engineering manager, I can likely teach you anything, but I can't change who you are as a person. And that's always stuck with me of like, that's why these storytelling components could be so helpful, because I could likely go and learn and figure out how to do that. But if you find my personality not jiving with your personality, we might not enjoy working together long term.
I just want to add one more thing, because it's a great point that you don't want it to sound rehearsed. Practice with your friends.
Yeah.
Just practice like saying these to somebody so you're not reading them. Like you can read them out to yourself and try to do it yourself, but find a buddy. And it's actually like the behavioral interview question roulette. Just Google behavioral interview questions and just find some and just ask each other.
We do, shameless plug, we do also have Interview Stream, which is a resource with over 1,500 interview questions where you can actually practice interviewing at home in the comfort of your own home. And it does actually record it. So then you can review it and see, did it come off as scripted or did it come off as natural? It's hard to feel natural being recorded, but you can find that fine line to balance that. So yeah, thanks for that.
But I think one of the important ones, if you're practicing with your friends, is that you don't take their story because it's more exciting. Because you'll get caught out.
Yeah.
You know, so it's got to be your story. Yeah?
So the last question from me is, and we're kind of already hitting on this, basically, what advice do you have about interviewing in general for both internships and jobs, either maybe from your own experiences as being an interviewee or as an interviewer? What advice would you want to share with this group today?
Be yourself. If you think you're turning up, you know, yes, you've got to practice for the interview and, you know, you're going into the corporation maybe of your dreams, but if you don't, you know, if you're trying to come off as somebody you aren't, it won't work out well for you. So, you know, if you've got a sense of humor, show your sense of humor. You know, nobody's expecting somebody to come in there and just recite, you know, a dialogue in front of a person, not come across as themselves. Because, to your point, we're looking for a match of personality to see how people fit into a team and how they're going to react with the other people in the department. So just be yourself.
Okay. Yeah, so my piece of advice is that an interview is a two-way street. They're interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them. You're trying to figure out if that company is a good fit for you. So think about it that way. When you're going in interviews, think about the way that the interviewer is presenting their company. Do you think that company culture is going to work for you? Do you like his personality? You know, these things are important.
All right, phone interview advice. Change out of your pajamas into real, like, nice clothes. You don't have to put your full suit on or anything, but like clothes that you wear, you know, out and about nicely to see people, right? Find a comfortable place to sit that's like at a desk in a seated chair. Don't be sitting on your couch or on your bed. That posture, that the way you're feeling, if you're feeling like you're in a more professional situation, it comes through in your voice. And a couple other things to try to find a quiet place. If you have like your dog starts barking in the background, that'll distract you and they might hear it. And, you know, so try to find a room. You can shut the door, no distractions. There's probably a few other things I could think of, but I know since phone interviews, we've been telling you how prevalent they are. I wanted to make sure to share some of the ways to make sure you're ready for those. So,
other piece I will add, I agree with the phone interview stuff. I've had a terrible experience with bad background noise, and it really does turn off the interviewer to, or the interviewer to the interviewee, it's just not a good experience. But the other thing I want to say is be prepared. When you go to an interview, have done some research on a company. Chances are most of your questions are going to get answered during the interview itself, but you may have a couple that you found during research that are very important to ask and understand. It also shows that you took the time to go learn about the company and what they're really about. Example I can give, I interviewed at a place about 1.5 years ago, and they were in the midst of a bunch of lawsuits with the government. And so I did my research, I asked the questions, I found out enough that I felt like when I was able to ask a question, it showed I knew enough about their company and some of the recent experiences so that they were more interested. And their answers also gave me enough to be like, maybe I don't want to work for you. So that's also good to know. And when you are interviewing, if you're just not feeling the company, that's okay. Don't take the first job just because it's being offered. Make sure it's a good fit for you. As Randall said, you're interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you.
So I noticed a couple things actually that I related to a lot that were just said. I noticed both Brian and Randall mentioned that interviewing is a two-way street. Another thing I wasn't particularly prepared for. So the question came up in almost every interview that I had at the end of the interview, do you have any questions for us? Which I wasn't expecting. So I thought for a second, I was like, no, I'm good. And I think a better answer is to actually have a question. So do think about that. Do look up the company and see what about it would be interesting to you and what you might want to know more about. I do think that's important. And then also like what Liam was talking about being yourself and being honest, I touched on the fact that I have a physics degree and working as a software engineer. So one thing that happened during my interviews is I got asked computer science questions that I had no idea what they were talking about. And then much as we were talking about, the best way that I found to respond to that is say, honestly, don't know, right? I'm not trying to flub my way through some answer because no one likes that. But they want to hear your honest answer, you don't know, and then you're interested to find out, right? And then what happened to me is the interviewers would give me sort of bits and pieces of computer science lessons and have me piece together the solution, which I was then able to do, and that went over well. So yeah, being honest when you don't know but still interested, I think is a good piece of advice.
Awesome. Thank you all. So now we're going to turn over to you. So if you have a question, do we have one more? No. Okay. Oh, sorry. So we are recording this for some of our distance students. And so if you want to go ahead and share your question, instead of maybe passing the mic around the room since we only have 2 handhelds, what you'll do is if you want to share the question, I'll probably just repeat it back so it's on the microphone. So yeah, who has got a question there if you want to raise your hand? Yeah, so we'll start right over here in the blue stripes. Yeah,
Hi, this is a question for Liam, because you're British. Have you noticed culturally in America any sort of pitfalls which might be different from other countries?
So the question is if there are any maybe cultural differences interviewing in America versus other than in other countries. Yeah, great question.
It is. I mean, stumped me. So I've been in the US for a year now, so and I came from the Middle East before then. So I don't think that for a multinational, I don't think there's much difference between, we're still looking for the same type of profile. I mean, obviously, especially, I would say one of the shocks for me is I tend to ask people a question because I'm a guy who's worked in a multinational for 20 odd years, and I've worked around the world. One of the ones which I tend to stump people on here is are you joining a multinational? Have you thought about working abroad? And a lot of the response are, I've looked at moving outside the state. Now, as a Brit, that's quite a weird answer for me to get because I've lived in France, Spain, Middle East, etc. So, it's knowing the guy who's going to interview or the girl who's going to interview, but I don't see there being a big difference between cultures. 12 months in, I'm not the most experienced of that. Maybe a little bit less stuffy than the British, But no, I don't know. I wouldn't say there's. I haven't seen much difference.
Do any of you do interviewing? I mean, it sounds like obviously you do interviewing for multinational positions. Do any of the rest of you do interviewing across country line, not just in the U.S., but other countries as well? And does that impact how you interview?
I have a little bit. I participated in a couple where I had to call in for interviewing some people in India, some engineers for our team in India at the time with my past company. It is a little bit different, but for the most part, I agree with Liam that we're looking for the same type of characteristics, same type of fit and personalities. So it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, and I think the main thing is making sure that, for me, it's making sure that I've got somebody who can fit in that culture. So again, I don't need somebody who's really quite nationalistic, and that comes across it, because that's not going to work if I'm putting them in a room with a, again, we just got to make it's that match and mix and match of people fitting together. But the questions that I'd ask would be the same no matter what nationality.
Great, thank you. So yes, right back here. Yeah, so for those of you who have experience at career fairs, how can a student stand out in such a short amount of time?
Passion for something, whether it's what you love, whether it's what the company does, whether it's, just something exhibiting passion. Because honestly, at a career fair, I'll talk to sometimes 300 people, right? I forget 295 of those right away.
So that goes back to that personality coming through piece. Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Yeah, right up here. Yeah, so for Ball Corp, I think we do think of it as being Ball Aerospace and Ball Corp being together. And so that idea that they are separate, so I'll let Liam speak to that, but a lot of folks do think about nationality, U.S. citizenship being a piece with working in the U.S. So question being, can non-U.S. citizens work at Ball Corporation? And then also feedback around interviewing. So how can we tell, because we only know if we pass or fail, in a sense of if we got the job or not got the job, how can we either receive feedback or maybe read our interviewers to know better?
So the first one, I work in the business that makes beverage packaging. So the nationality issue is not an issue for us. For aerospace, I would imagine that can be different depending. Yeah, so US citizen only for there's certain parts of the business I can't walk into with being British. So for us, it doesn't make any difference. It's about the skill sets, the person coming in. It's about, bringing, your skills and your expertise and your passion into the business. So nationality doesn't have anything to do with it. As for the number of technical questions you get right and that scores you off, no, I would never say I've got a list and say, right, they got 5 out of 6 and that's it, they're out. It's not just, for me, it's not just the technical questions. And again, go back to, we're not expecting people to be able to design a can of the future in an interview when they've just walked straight out of university. So the technical question, yes, there's elements in there, and to the point that you might not know a technical question, it's how you should approach that with a logical manner. And that's what we're looking for in the logical is this person logical? Can they get to an end solution? But, the soft skills are just as important, because especially in the organization, the area I'm in, yes, I manage a lot of engineers, but I need vice presidents, I need future directors, I need people who are going to lead as well. So I'm trying to, it's great. I've got a bank of engineers, but I also need managers, I need directors, etc. So I'm looking for leadership skills as well.
And I'll just add, when you are interviewing, you can ask the person for feedback, and maybe it's after you've heard you're not getting the job, but they can then, in some cases, provide you some level of feedback. We have to be careful what we say giving that feedback, but I've always been able to offer something to people I haven't hired when they've asked.
But don't ask in the interview, did I get the job? I've had that. And if I didn't, why didn't I get that? Don't do that. Because at the end of the day, a lot of times we're going in a panel afterwards talking about the person. So it's not fair to just give a response at that moment.
And I'll just put the reality out there too. Sometimes you will never know. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you will never get feedback from certain places. I didn't get the job. I'd like to know why. You can ask, and they might have restrictions like, I'm sorry, we can't share that. Or they might just not reply to you. But sometimes some companies are, especially if they're smaller companies, for example, and maybe have more bandwidth to have those continuous conversations with candidates. But reality, sometimes you might never know.
Yeah, unfortunately, Deloitte's policy is not to give feedback after the interview. But right at the end of the interview, if you ask the interviewer for feedback on the case, for example, if you went over a case and you were asking for areas of improvement, they're happy to share feedback then. So
one thing that I noticed as well is that many interviews are sort of divided into a portion that's sort of technical questions, and then another portion that's more free discussion. And during the technical questions, oftentimes it's a pretty sort of dry, serious back and forth between you guys. But during the open discussion part of that, the people that I happen to know that I interviewed well with would have almost a discussion as friends with me after the technical part of it, right? We'd laugh or tell a joke or laugh or something, right? It would be very, very warm discussion. If someone thinks that you did really bad in the technical portion of the interview, they're not going to laugh at your jokes. So that's it's true. So that's one way that you can, if you want, maybe kind of gauge, right? Is just see how the conversation after the technical portion of the interview goes, to have an idea what they thought of you.
I'm an engineer, so I tend to put down positives and negatives of the interview. But on the same token, I did an interview with a person the other day, and it was just a bad fit. So the technical side, fantastic, but the personality just will not fit in with the organization. So, and that was via a headhunter. You feedback to the headhunter of what your views were, and they obviously have to filter it down to give the feedback to the candidate. But sometimes it's just difficult to give the feedback because it's a feeling as well. It's not just it's not a binary type of conversation. You've got to take in there's aspects of that it's fairly hard for you to explain back to the person without crushing the personality afterwards. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, right over here. Oh, great question. How should students and new hires answer the question, what are your salary expectations? Which I feel like those are often in applications, but potentially also in interview. Yeah, what are some thoughts?
So the reason that question is asked, sometimes you'll get it in a phone screen often, and it's generally when you're talking to the HR recruiter. Occasionally it might come up in other places, but depending on the structure of the interview. The reason, and sometimes that is a question that is asked of every single applicant to every single job at that company. The reason for that is mainly because if someone with years of work experience is coming in and they've been making a certain salary, let's just use round numbers. They've been making like $75,000 a year, and the job, and they want to stay at least in that range. And they, like if it's between, or jump up like between 80 and 100, right? And if you're the recruiter or the interviewer and the job pays 50,000, the question is asked to make sure you're not just miles apart and wasting everybody's time, like, oh, we cannot get anywhere near that. And sometimes that's just to open a conversation. Answering that question as a current college student or a recent college graduate with maybe not a whole lot of work experience yet, a great way to say, do some research. And salary.com and glassdoor.com, you can take a look and do your research on those. But it's really to say, I want to be paid competitively for the position, for the level, for my experience. If you've done research, you can say, this is what I found in my research, this range, but it's negotiable. I definitely am open to conversation. So if they're demanding a number from you, try to get some of that research done and say, oh, here's the range that I found in my research. But yeah, that is the general purpose of asking that question. So don't be afraid of it. Like if you, and also I think the majority of companies, I do want to put this out there because I think this is what people are afraid of. If they say a number too low and that the company might be like, ooh, we can pay them lower than we were originally going to, right? Let's give them a lower salary than if they're going to be okay with it. That, unless it's a really unscrupulous company, that generally doesn't happen. Most companies are going to want to pay you for the range of the type of job you're getting based on what everyone else in the group is making. Where do you fit in? They look at all these different factors. So don't be afraid of putting out a number if you're worried about that. Oh, I don't want to say something too low.
Only thing I'd want to add to that is don't always look at the salary as the only piece of the compensation package. A lot of companies will offer 401k matching, so there's a lot of free money that's out there, plus the rest of the benefit package. I know my company we have a gym, membership reimbursement, and other random things. So look at the total package and kind of understand what your expectations are and what you think that company is going to be providing.
I have a follow-up to this, I guess. After an offer is made, hopefully you guys get offers. I believe in you. They'll give you a number. And in my experience, it doesn't piss people off if you ask politely whether they can increase that. And actually, that worked out for me. So I don't be afraid to ask. Don't be like pushy about it, but don't be afraid to ask if you think it's appropriate. Whether they are prepared to offer any more to be competitive, or whatever the right wording is, because they're not going to retract an offer. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think anyone is going to retract an offer to you just because you asked whether they would be able to pay you more.
Do you all have any tips on salary negotiation then, since we've kind of opened that can up? Any other thoughts to add to that?
Just once you sort of, if you guys are in different places on salary, remember that money's not the only thing. I mean, that we were hitting on, there are benefits that the company can offer, 401k match. Maybe you can throw in like flexible work hours, like you can work from home or something. Like there are other ways to negotiate besides just moving a number up and down.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, it's only your first salary. You'll have that salary maybe a year, and then you'll hopefully get a merit increase or cost of living increase or something. I mean, you get promoted eventually. It's not your salary forever. So some people forget that when they're just thinking about, oh, this is what I'm going to make forever.
All right. I know we got a few more questions, so we'll go right here and then right here.
You talked about communicating your passion in those 2 minutes at the career fair. So do you have any tips on how one may be passionate but may not be able to communicate in those 2 minutes? And a follow-up question is, all of you talked that during the entire interview process, all stages, one is looking for a better
find it a bit difficult to firstly adjust with the American culture and the background, okay, or getting relatedness. So how under that background, how can one communicate that one is a good fit irrespective of having a strong technical background?
So for the recording. To recap, it sounds like, and I'll expand it beyond career fair maybe, if we have a short bit of time with someone at a networking event or career fair, and we only have a couple of minutes, how do we make that passion come across? And then a follow-up to that is, what are some of the cultural implications for folks who really might be adjusting to American culture, and that in some ways we can represent and show up passion differently? What advice do we all have for that?
I wish I had a magic answer for you. Because like I said, 300 people, 5 might really stand out to me at a career fair or a networking event or something. And why it is, and I'll tell you what, I used to work with a lot of international students, and it's difficult because U.S. culture does really value that exhibit of passion. And I know many, if not most other cultures across this globe, it's not necessarily something that's emphasized. It's more, do you have the technical? Do you have the grades? Do you have this and that? And I know that's the case. And it's a near impossibility to try to teach that skill in the short amount of time that, especially if you've recently just arrived in the U.S., how to teach how to exhibit that passion or that, to someone who's not culturally accustomed to it. So I don't think I have a great answer for you, but I've seen people who have learned it and who have been able to sort of convey that. But it is, for better or worse, it's something valued by many, if not most, U.S. employers. So for international students looking for a job in the U.S., it's a tough thing to overcome.
I'll give you an example. I sat in a management meeting with the leadership team in North America of our company, and Brazilian guy turned around and said, "Liam's really not happy with this. What's going on?" The American guys, he's just raised his eyebrows, because British poker face or whatever. So, it's a difficult one. So for me, I suppose I've been used to working around the world. So, I sometimes the passion can come over to me being disingenuous, but maybe for one of my colleagues thinks that's fantastic. So, I don't think there's no easy answer here. Hopefully, you've got somebody who's got a wide experience of interviewing a lot of different nationalities.
Yeah, and this also probably isn't the answer you wanted, but I feel like the reason that we like looking for passion students and that makes you memorable is because it's hard to fake. If you're not passionate about something, it's going to be hard for you to convince me that you are. So we look for that because it demonstrates that you really do have a passion, something you're interested. You get excited when you talk about it. So I guess my advice would be, don't fake it. Think about something that you truly are passionate about. It doesn't have to be something that's particularly interesting to most people, but if it's interesting to you, it will be interesting to us. It'll transfer. So.
Another quick follow-up is, how do you differently look at a fresh graduate and a student who is having 2 or 3 years of experience but outside US? Or is he still treated as a fresher? Or how does it?
So thinking of maybe our master's students who might be graduating or someone who might be had years of experience just not inside the U.S. Does that impact your thoughts on interviewing?
Hopefully I'm not reading too much of this. I know I've worked with a couple of women from India that when they came to the U.S. initially, some companies wouldn't recognize their degree. And so they came back to school, got a master's from a U.S. university, and then were trying to join the workforce at that point. Their experience does come through in the interview. And so we do recognize that. And usually they get recognized as having more years of experience than someone who's truly fresh out of school that doesn't have that 2 to 3 years.
So something to keep in mind, career services helps with all of this. So we've been talking about passion and storytelling. That is the work we do. I think a lot of folks think we help with resumes. Yes. And a resume is basically maybe your foot in the door, if that, the interview, the conversation, the relationship. One of the best ways, if you're not sure how to get that passion across, actually what I'll often do is I'll record our interviewing, and I literally will ask a curveball question that I know that you're not prepared for. Because that's usually when you can get a passionate answer on video, and then we can juxtapose them next to each other. And that sometimes can really help you see where it's coming out or not coming out. And you could try that at home as well or with a friend. But yeah, it's something that it's hard to fake, as they've been articulating. So if you're concerned about that after hearing this especially, come in and talk with us, and we'd be happy to help you. So we had a question right back here, and then I'll hop up here. Yeah. Ooh, great question. What are the best questions you've been asked in an interview? To Kirk's point, what questions do you have for me? So what is the best questions you've been asked?
What's the worst thing about working here?
Ooh.
My current job, that's when someone took the last cup of coffee and didn't make a new pot. But I mean, it can vary, but I think that's a really tough question because it forces the interviewer to think about what they don't like about their company, because reality is most people love where they're working at or like where they're working at quite a bit. So for me, that was a surprise question and also made me think.
So I always like it when, I mean, it's great to do your research, and it's always good to have some questions ready to go about what you've learned about the company. But I love it when candidates have really thought about, is this really a place I want to work, and how can I get that information out of my interviewer? A question like, why do you stay? Or if they're a recent hire, why did you join? But that is sometimes, it's sort of the reverse of the passion question, right? It's now getting that out of the person working there. Like, why do you stay? If you've been here 10 years, why do you stay? If you've been here 1 year, why did you join? And what do you think so far? So it's a little more in depth, and you can get a wide variety of answers besides just what's the company culture like, right? Which is a good one too, I guess. But, you can get a little bit deeper into it.
I'd say for me, one of the questions which I like is if somebody's in the interview and asking me what my vision is for the future of the department, or what, where we're going, because, fine, you might be a fit for today, but if we're changing the organization radically, and that's not going to suit you, so it's that question to try and see where the future's going and what my take is on that, etc. So I think that's quite a good question to ask an interview, because you're interested in that future view as well as not just the present moment.
All right. Yeah, right over here.
So as a graduating student that's looking to enter the full-time workforce, if you're applying to a job that's, say, like entry level 0 to 2 work experience, years work experience, how do you, when you know you're going up against people that maybe have those 1 to 2 extra years on you, and you're only got your internships and your school projects, how do you stand out in an interview other than just focusing on what, compared to the other candidates, might be kind of old news like an interview? Like, how do you compare yourself to people that have those true work experiences, and what makes you stand out when you're just transitioning?
So what advice do you have if you are just that new grad transitioning into the workforce, when you might be interviewing with folks who have a couple of years of experience under their belt? What advice do you have for them to stand out?
So my advice is good storytelling. It doesn't matter how much experience you have. If you can't tell your story in an interview, they're not going to get that. And so if you can tell the interviewer about your experience working, whatever your internship was, and how you demonstrated whatever qualities they're looking for better than the other guy, you'll have a leg up.
Being authentic. The reality is someone who's got 2 years of experience compared to someone who's 0. In some companies, that may be one project. Some companies, that may be 10% of a project. I know Ball Aerospace's projects take decades. So you may not be that far behind the curve after all, depending on where you're looking at. So just really being authentic and being able to express what you can do and what you do bring to the table, and what excites you about working there.
Yeah, and I think the other thing as well, if the work, the years of work experience is so important to the company or the interview, you wouldn't be in the room. So don't think about the competition. It's your interview. It's you to get your message over, learn both sides. So you wouldn't have made it into you wouldn't have made the interview if 3 years experience is so crucial for me. Then I'm not going to interview somebody who's got no experience. So, the fact that you've made it in the room is your resume is already spoken for itself. And then the other side comes in, storytelling for a Brit. It's, the facts, so, yeah, so it's, sorry, it's language differences. So yeah, he's coming through with, those examples of real life, not hypothetical stuff.
I was actually kind of going to say the same thing, that if you make it to the interview, you're competitive with them. Period. I mean, yeah, 1 year, 2 years at that level, if that's what they're looking for, and if they're picking people to come in the room to interview, you've already you're fine. Don't worry too much about that if you're to the interview phase. So same thing.
Actually, just to add to that, if you're being brought in for an interview, you're probably one of 3 to 5 candidates. So by that point, you have beaten 95% of the competition.
So I have a thought on that as well, though, is don't be afraid to not get a job at an interview. The first interview that I had, the job that it was for, I already knew before I walked in the interview room that I would not take it, even if I got offered it. I really just wanted to practice interviewing, which probably pisses you guys off. but but no, I think it's good from your perspective to practice and to be in the sort of a high pressure situation of, this is my first interview. I don't know how to interview yet, or I have no experience with this. Now I have to, promote myself. It's difficult, or at least for me, it's pretty difficult to do. I think having some practice with it where I didn't care if I failed was really helpful. So I would encourage that. And then that sort of leads in, I have actually a question for the panel. So I had an experience. I had an experience where I was interviewing for a position that I thought was interesting. The company didn't think I was the right fit, but they, I guess, liked me enough to pass along my resume to other people at the company, who then flew me out to North Carolina for actual formal interview. And then they did make an offer. So my question is sort of, how would you go about, I don't know, sort of asking, is there any other position at the company that I might be a good fit for, even if you don't necessarily know how you did during the interview? Do you have thoughts on that?
I wouldn't ask that question until after you didn't get the position, I would say. Yeah. But the one thing I do want to say about going to like a practice interview, like going to an interview, you're not interested in the job. I know Brian was like, yeah, we do hate it, but I've done it. I've done it recently. In my last job search, less than a year ago, I've done it. So as a professional, because I hadn't interviewed in years, and but the other thing is, you might go into that interview thinking it's just a practice, and it takes some of the pressure off, and you do really well, and you learn about the company, and all of a sudden you're like, actually, I didn't realize that this is pretty amazing, and I didn't realize it. So I personally, as like a human coaching people, I think it's fine to do that. As a recruiter, I'm like, because sometimes you lose, like, you really want the person and then they just walk away. But yeah.
So. Yes, I've had students ask that, can I get a practice interview? And we've probably all been there, but I like your point, Heidi, because that's actually how I got the first job I went to, I didn't want, and it ended up solidifying my now career path. 8 years later. And thankfully, my first boss now works here at CU, and he was back in the room, so glad he left now that I realized I just said that. He'll listen to on the recording. But yeah, I thought I wanted a different role, interviewed at the company, and they were amazing, and the team and the job, everything was perfect. And I actually got an offer from another company, and I turned it down, the one I wanted. So sometimes those practice interviews can be your next step in your future too, so don't be afraid. So we've probably got time for at least 2 or 3 more questions. So let's see some hands. So I've got a hand right up here, and then anyone on deck? All right, we'll start right over here, and then back, yeah.
So, quick question. In a career fair, how was the best way to break the ice with the recruiter that's in the conversation?
So again, I'll kind of broaden the question just to the whole panel. Not all these folks probably attend career fairs. So at a networking event or a career fair or a happy hour, how do we best break the ice? What's a good strategy maybe to approach someone at a networking style event?
I've done a handful of career fairs at School of Mines in Golden, and really just coming up and just talking. I mean, it's easy. Introduce yourself. Hey, I'm Brian. I'm a second-year student. I'm interested in an internship. Do you guys have any internships? This is the type of stuff I'm interested in. Just break the ice with that. That's enough for career fair stuff. A lot of these conversations, as Heidi mentioned, they're quick. They're a couple minutes. You only have a couple minutes to make that impression, but it doesn't have to be anything outrageous to make that impression.
Any other tips?
You might all have done an elevator pitch. You guys know what that is? Like the 30 seconds that you're like in an elevator and you go to the top. What can you say about yourself? Career fair, it's almost too much. I don't want 30 seconds. It's wasting time. Whether it's a career fair, networking event, etc. I mean, how do you start a conversation with a stranger? That's really what you're asking, right? There's this fantastic speaker who's written books about networking like a rock star. His name's Jamin Patel. And he has the 3-word introduction. Stick out your hand. You smile. You say, "Hi, I'm Heidi." Everybody can do that, right? You walk to the stage, "Hi, I'm Heidi."
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. All of a sudden, our conversation started, and more often than not, he's going to say, "Hi, I'm Randall," and then, "Oh, what are you interested in?" It's simple, right? It doesn't have to be complicated to start that conversation. If I'm at a career forward networking event and someone wants to come and work for my company, my first thing is, "Oh, tell me a little about yourself," or is, "So why ball? Like, why'd you walk up to me today?" And so if you've got answers to things like you walk up to a company and say, "Oh, hi, I'm Heidi. I'm interested in this company because bloop," whatever it is. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Awesome. And we had a question, I think, towards the back. Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. What tips do you have for group interviewing or group interview?
No, we don't do that.
That's a good, better question. Do any of you do group interviewing?
Yeah, so Deloitte used to, but we don't do that anymore. I think some consulting companies might still, but I don't think it's that common.
Does anyone else?
No experience with that.
I have answers to every question. Just full disclosure. While I've been a recruiter for many years, I was also a career advisor for many years. So I've had experiences on both sides of the table here. And you're right. You probably won't encounter that many of them anymore, but every once in a while where it's a group of students and the interviewer's looking to see, who's taking the initiative and who's sitting back and letting other people answer first. I mean, that's one example of something the interviewer might be looking for. So if you're actively engaged in the conversation, it's hard. If you're sitting in a room with 4 other candidates, and there's somebody who's always, like me, always grabbing the microphone first, right? You want to maybe be the one who every once in a while will say something first. And it's out of a lot of people's comfort zones to compete in that way, but that might be one thing that they're looking for.
One thing that might make this a little bit more broad that maybe other folks love it. I've noticed a few employers that we work with here have started doing maybe inviting a bunch of students to a dinner or to a not working hour before their interview. So that is still, in a sense, a group interview, but is different. I don't know if any of you, that broadens any experiences for any of you, but I think to Heidi's point, a lot of it's standing out.
Same advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember years ago in the UK, that was how we brought on graduates. But it was a free bar the night before and then interviews the next day. So that was an interesting dynamic of seeing people turning up for a interview practice and maybe drinking too much. But yeah, but it was quite a good way of seeing people in a more relaxed setting. So I've seen that, but that's a long time ago now.
But you don't want to be the annoying one either, who's every single time like, oh, yeah, me, because that's annoying.
Yeah, I almost forgot. At Deloitte, we also do like a happy hour between interviews. So we have 2 days of interviews. They're back to back. If you make it past the first round, we invite you out to the Rio downtown, open bar, all of that. And we don't frame it as a test, but it's still the interview. We're seeing what you're like in a social situation. Do you have personal skills? Were you only on in the interview and you're actually kind of dull, or so we're testing for all of that. And also can you be professional in a social setting? So that's some of the things that we're looking for in that type of event.
Awesome. Probably have time for one more question. Is there any other questions in the room? Yeah, right over here.
It's sort of the reverse of the question earlier, but if, say, you have some years of experience in industry, and then you go back into education, and you come to an interview, what are you interested in hearing? Are you interested in hearing stuff that might be 3 or 4 years out of date, that is industry experience, or are you interested in hearing projects you've been doing at school?
Both.
Great question. Yeah, sorry. Great question about whether or not, I'm assuming maybe from a master's perspective, folks who have taken a break from school and gone and worked in industry and come back to get that advanced degree. What do you want to hear examples from in the interview?
Both of them, really. Sorry, I'll just reiterate it. So both, really, because it does tell a more complete story about some of your past interests and your past experiences, and then where you want to progress to as you're going forward. So it is important to know about both of those and have stories that relate to both of them.
I mean, the chances are with your resume, that sticks out anyway. So that'll be, the interviewer would obviously latch on to the fact that you've got experience before. For me, it's the storytelling of what's the best answer for that particular question. You don't want to try and ram down the years before or these current years. It's the answer, but the resume is going to speak for itself on that aspect.
All right. Any last thoughts from our panelists? Any last pieces of advice or tidbits that you might want to share before we wrap up?
While I don't do it, I do know others that will stalk candidates. So clean up your social media accounts.
Yes, that is a good one. But speaking of actually social media, because we get this question a lot, how active are you all on LinkedIn? And if people reach out to you, is that something that you encourage or engage in?
A little bit on LinkedIn, but I'm not otherwise on any other social platforms.
Yeah.
Social platforms, I'm a little bit old for that. LinkedIn, yes, but I get a lot of companies trying to sell me things, so it's very difficult to not just ignore them. And I get a lot of requests, and you think, I don't even know this person, so I wouldn't use that. For me, that's not the best of avenues.
If I'm hiring somebody onto my team, I will 100% of the time look at their LinkedIn profile. And I think in the world of recruiting, that is fairly common. The rest of social media, it depends a lot on the team, on the interviewer, on the size of the company. But I do know people who will do Google searches on people, right? Image searches. Yeah, I have a story about somebody who, it was actually a shame. Someone had created a fake profile on some remote social media website about this woman that was completely lies. And one of the people on the recruiting team was just doing a Google search and found it. And they actually came to me, but chose not to share it with the rest of the interviewers for that position, because it was pretty obvious. I mean, it was scathing and very clearly, probably fake, but you're not quite sure. These things are out there. So Google yourself, but more importantly, find somebody who you're not connected in social media on to do like Google searches and social media searches for you. Because, your friends see more than someone who you're not connected to. So have somebody do a search for you just in case something is out there, and image searches too. So
or if your name's super common, make sure that you don't have someone else out there. Because I've had
the mugshot. That's why LinkedIn is great. I say put your LinkedIn tag on your resume.
Mm-hmm.
So personally, it's probably a good thing that Heidi wasn't looking at my LinkedIn account, because there's basically nothing on it. But as far as, okay, so this made me think of something else, though, is rather than putting my resume into the black hole of the internet or going through LinkedIn, I found it a lot more effective if I had any mutual connections through an adult friend of mine at a company. An introduction made to someone, not for the purpose of an interview, but hey, could I get career advice from you? That's how I got my current job, is someone I knew introduced me to someone at Trimble. And I was there purely to ask, hey, do you have career advice for how someone gets a job out of college? And she said, oh, yeah, by the way, there's this rotational program in Westminster. Oh, you went to school in Colorado, didn't you? You might be interested in that. And I was like, all right, sweet. I'll go to the interview if there's one, right? And they set me up with an interview. So you don't have to go. In fact, it's probably better if you try and subvert the sort of standard channels, if you will, to get an interview, because I think connections are really important.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So let's go ahead and give our panelists a round of applause. So we're going to actually head out to the courtyard. It is a nice night, and our panelists are going to stick around for just a little bit more time. So feel free to be able to ask them those questions, maybe if there's something you didn't want to ask in front of the large group that you want to know about, or just to get to know each other. So thank you so much. We'll give them a minute to get out there, so feel free to gather up your belongings and head out that way. They've got to do the same.